Welcome to another Hockey Writers Podcast 2022-23 NHL season preview. I'm your host, Kyle Knopp, and I'm joined by my co-host, Matthew Zator. And today we are talking Philadelphia Flyers with Colin Newby. Colin, how you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Excellent. We're excited to have you on, excited to talk about some Philadelphia Flyers. Just off-season moves. They had quite a few, so let's jump right into it, starting with their forwards. One of their newest acquisitions was Nicolas Deslauriers. So wanted to get your thoughts on him, Colin. What are your expectations coming into this season?
I think Deslauriers is a decent player. Just with the style that I grew up as a kid, loving and glorifying this rough and tough style. Deslauriers plays it. So when he's been on other teams, I've taken notice of him. He certainly knows how to stand up for teammates, how to play a tough physical game, but I don't know if he's the best fit with the Flyers. They gave him a decent amount of money, 1.75 in AAV, and some trade protection just for a fourth liner. I don't know if it was the wisest use of resources, but I do think he brings a little bit of a physical edge, and that's something that they have missed at times in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Deslauriers, I know when he was in Minnesota there, Mariah really liked him on the team. And, he brings that physical presence. He can score. I mean, he has when he gets the opportunity, he seems to be able to put it in the net. But, he's like a third, fourth, maybe max a third liner. Like he could probably play on a third line, and kills penalties. So, I mean, he's going to be useful. But, yeah, for the money, I don't know. That's not what the Flyers need. That's the biggest thing. They don't, that type of player. But, Tortorella's the coach now. He'll probably really like him. He plays that type of style that he really likes. So I think he'll probably fit in pretty well. But he's not going to help what the Flyers really need. And that's scoring, which.
Yeah.
So, but one guy that did do a lot of that last season, he came over from the Columbus Blue Jackets and fit in really well. On the team really quickly, Cam Atkinson, and had a pretty good season. What do you expect from him in his coming season? He's going to do the same, over 20 goals, or exceed it? Like he had a 30-goal season a few years ago now, but what do you expect from him in his second season?
I think Atkinson's a pretty key player on this team. They don't necessarily have guys that are ideal fits for the top line. I think Atkinson would be best served on a contending team as a second line player, but he might be pushed into a little higher of a role. He won the Bobby Clark Trophy last year as the team's MVP, but even in exit interviews, he said that nobody deserved it. So, I mean, is he a good offensive player? Yes, he is. Can he score, I want to say 25, 30 goals this year? Yes, I think he can. But I think he might be asked to do a little bit too much as a go-to offensive guy where he's not the biggest play driver, the biggest dynamic scorer. One thing I do think he can bring to the team that's very important, though, is experience playing under John Tortorella. Mm-hmm. He was one of the biggest advocates of the Tortorella hire back early in the offseason when the Flyers were doing their coaching search. And he's been on the record plenty of times talking about how the Flyers need to come to camp ready to work and how they have to be well conditioned. They have to stick up for each other next year. I think it is going to be very valuable to have a veteran who's been around the block and who's played under this guy, helping everybody get acclimated in what they hope to be a new era under this tough, experienced head coach.
Well, he also... as I mentioned, I mean, his best offensive season came under Tortorella. He had 41 goal season he had, and his 35 goal season, both under Tortorella. So, it's something that is probably, he has confidence in with the coach. So I don't know if he'll hit that again with him, but that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's part of that. Like you said, Matt, he had his two best seasons under Tortorella. So the catch-22 there, right, is that as people expect him to do that again under Tortorella, if he doesn't live up to that, even a 25 to 30 goal, like you said, season, Colin, would be very successful for him and very successful for the Flyers. But if it's not that, 35 to 40 range, is he going to, get flack for not hitting those numbers? So that will be a key storyline to keep our eye on as well. All right. Well, I want to ask you about Sean Couturier. He has been suffering from another injury to his back. So not just him when he comes back, but how much pressure will also be on Kevin Hayes and Scott Laughton to step in and fill his role until Couturier can come back? And then what does Couturier have to do to prove he is back?
Well, I think they might be asking Kevin Hayes a little too much, as I just said about Atkinson. You were already very thin as it was. Asking Kevin Hayes to now be a first-line center, I don't know if he can handle that at this point in his career. You don't have the most dynamic wingers to begin with, and you're just very thin overall down the middle. Like I said about Atkinson being an ideal fit on the second line, you had Couturier as your really only bona fide first liner on this roster, and now you don't even know if he's going to play this season. If he does, he'll probably miss the first half. We'll wait for more news to come out about that injury, but this spells real trouble for the Flyers. And Scott Laughton has probably played a little bit better on the wing the past couple of years than he has as a center. Well, now that luxury's ruined. You got to push him right back into the middle. And I don't think he is a top of the lineup player either. He's better served as a bottom sixer to where his grit shows up and he can play a two-way game. Now you're going to ask him to do a lot more than you would ideally want. And that's what happens when a player at the caliber of Sean Couturier is not there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, well, of course, they traded Claude Giroux last season too. So he's not here to start the year for the first time in forever. So it's like, I asked this question, are they good enough to compete with, center depth of Hayes, Laughton, Morgan Frost, and Patrick Braun, who's still funny. That's the same as as their different Patrick Braun, as their four centermen. I mean, are they good enough to even compete at all in this ridiculously competitive Metropolitan Division?
Well, before the Couturier injury, I thought they were a real long shot to earn a playoff berth. I did think they were going to be a little bit more competitive than they were last year. Everybody in the organization is preaching about a new standard and working hard and not rolling over in the way that they did last year. And I really did believe that they would go out and do that. But now you subtract your best player, your best scorer who you were really counting on. Can you really even think that they'll be more competitive than last year? They finished with the fourth worst record in the NHL. And I think they'll be in that same range again this year.
Yeah. I don't think they really did enough to get much stronger on the front end there, at least talking about their forward group, to really fill in and score those goals. And like you said, this is a tough division. And if you're not scoring goals in this division, there's really, really good goaltending. You're probably not winning games. All right, Colin, I want to get your thoughts on which young gun needs to step up the most this season for the Flyers.
I think I'll go with Cam York, the young defenseman. He will probably play a limited role at the beginning of the season, likely on the third pair, but probably getting some power play time on the second unit behind Tony DeAngelo. But I liked what I saw from York last year. He can move the puck and he can play at both ends of the ice. He played with a little bit of intensity in the defensive zone, which I did not hear much about when he was a prospect coming through the system, but I did see a little bit of it in his stint towards the end of last season. I think Cam York's got a lot of potential, and while he's not necessarily a top pair defenseman right away at such a young age, I think he could work into more and more of a role as this season goes on. And if they aren't competitive, like we spoke about a minute ago, they might not be in the playoff running in the second half of the year. Maybe you give a guy like Cam York a little more added responsibility and let him come into his own. So I'm anxious to see how he does this season.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, there are some. They brought in a couple guys to kind of try to help this forward group out with the injuries and stuff. Antoine Roussel and Artem Anisimov. Roussel, obviously third, fourth liner, but Anisimov has shown in the past to be a good top six guy. Maybe not at his age anymore, but do you expect any of them to earn a contract out of their PTO?
Well, a couple of days ago when the news first broke, I probably would have told you no. And then with the Couturier news coming down, I think Artem Anisimov really benefits in an indirect way there
Yeah.
because of a lack of center depth. I think that it's very much possible that you see a veteran who has plenty of NHL experience. He played in the KHL last year, but I believe he has 11 seasons of previous experience. If you see a guy like that and you only have younger players like Morgan Frost and then a guy like Patrick Braun, who's not been at the NHL his entire professional career, he's been kind of a swing player. Maybe you do give Anisimov a shot as a retread veteran. It wouldn't shock me, especially a coach like Tortorella that wants to come in and set a new standard. He probably sees a guy that he had with the New York Rangers years ago as somebody who knows how to handle himself, knows how to go about things in the NHL, and can maybe pave the way for an AHL call-up a few months into the season.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Colin, I want to get your last thoughts on these Flyers forwards here. A new group without Claude Giroux, pretty much without Sean Couturier. This group under John Tortorella, how do you stack them up with the other teams in the Metro?
I think that's the whole problem that they're facing. The offensive firepower just isn't there. If you look around the division, obviously the Penguins and the Capitals have had these sustained runs of success for so long, and it's not really that hard to figure out why. You look at Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, two of the best players in the world for a very long period of time. The Penguins have the longest playoff streak in the NHL. You look at the Capitals, Alexander Ovechkin, possibly the best goal scorer of all time. We'll see if that one pans out. But then you look around the rest of the division. The Columbus Blue Jackets got Johnny Gaudreau. The Islanders have Matthew Barzal, who's still improving. The Hurricanes, Sebastian Aho, and Svechnikov. These guys, they're getting to the next level, and the Flyers just simply don't have that kind of skilled offensive firepower. Travis Konechny led the team in scoring last year. He was 119th in the NHL in total points and first on the Flyers. That pretty much says it all right there. They don't have the scorers.
Yeah. And like we said, that's a tough division. We'll talk about goaltending and how they rank in the Metro in a little bit, but Metro probably has some of the best goaltending in the NHL right now.
Yeah. Well, let's move to the defense now, which they have some injury problems too. But let's first talk about the newcomer. You mentioned him briefly in the first section about with Cam York, but Tony DeAngelo coming over from the Carolina Hurricanes after a really good season, over 50 points, but was traded. So he's now coming into Philadelphia. What do you see his role being on this defense?
He's definitely going to be playing the power play. And this was the 32nd ranked power play in the NHL last year. They really just could not get anything going. They were just over 12% on the season. A lot of teams doubled them up last year. So DeAngelo does bring some experience on the power play as a distributor. I don't know if he'll be the shooter that they're looking for with the man advantage, but I do think he helps them out. He's got a low bar to clear from last year, but I do think he gives them some improvement there. And other than that, I think he will be a much better puck mover than they had last year. If you watch the Flyers at all when they struggled defensively last season, a lot of the root of it was that they couldn't break the puck out of their own zone. And that's what DeAngelo's good at. And I think that's the purpose of acquiring him from the Carolina Hurricanes. I do have a lot of concerns about him, though. The first being that he played with Jacob Slavin last year. And for my money, Jacob Slavin might be the best defenseman in the NHL in terms of pure defensive acumen. DeAngelo definitely benefited from having a partner who's that good. So if you look at the advanced metrics and you take Slavin out of the equation, DeAngelo's not great relative to his other teammates. He had a lot of offensive zone starts last season. I believe it was 61% of his faceoffs were in the offensive zone. So it's tough to transition from such a high caliber teammate like Slavin playing next to you and go to a situation in Philadelphia where they don't have as much talent. Ivan Provorov is a good defenseman. He's talented, but he's been shaky the past 2 years. He's been one of the culprits in having problems to break the puck out of the zone. And some of the media in Philadelphia has even talked about how Provorov might not be one of the best fits under Tortorella. His attitude wasn't great last year. He wasn't happy about his partner, who most frequently was Justin Braun, but it became clear that Provorov was not happy that they didn't have a partner for him that he felt was a first pair caliber guy. If things do sour with DeAngelo, does that dynamic go awry? I don't know. We're going to have to see how this pans out.
Yeah, it's going to be another very interesting storyline to really, keep our eye on this season. There's been a lot of news following DeAngelo the last few years wherever he's gone. So it'll always be interesting to kind of just keep that in mind as the season unfolds. All right, I want to ask you. You brought him up already, Ivan Provorov, with Ryan Ellis unavailable to start the season because of injury. Is it going to fall on Provorov to bounce back and lead the defense this season? Or do you see that being someone else's responsibility to step up?
Yeah, I think that Provorov does have to step up. If you look back 2 years ago, Matt Niskanen retired after the playoff bubble. He was the first pair defenseman alongside Provorov. And since that happened, he's had 2 bad seasons without Niskanen.
Yeah.
You can say all you want that the Flyers haven't replaced Niskanen and they don't have a right shot defenseman who's capable of playing those kind of minutes. But ultimately, Provorov is responsible for Provorov's play.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's been given enough credit over the past 2 years from the coaching staff, from the organization, or from Provorov himself. So if he wants to be accountable for his own play and step up with a better suited right-handed defenseman in DeAngelo, maybe not a perfect fit, as we just talked about, but if he wants to step up with a better partner, then he's a talented defenseman, and I think he can get back on track. But not with what he's shown in the last 2 years. He has to be a lot better.
Yeah, for sure. And he's still relatively young too. So he still has room to grow. It's just, like you say, he's responsible for himself, and he's got to step up. And with these injuries, that, best opportunity right now.
He's relatively young. These guys come into the league at 18, 19. You figure they're in their 30s when they've been around a little while.
He's still really young.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're like, oh man, he's been around for like 6-7 years. He's got to be close to 30. And you're like, no, he's only like 24, 25.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing. Like, you're looking at guys like Quinn Hughes. I mean, he's only 22, 23? Yeah. And it seems like he's been around already for a bit. And Makar, same thing. So, we'll see what happens with him. Well, he also mentioned Justin Braun. He was traded at the deadline to the Rangers. Now he's back. Was that the right decision to bring him back? What are your expectations for him coming into this season?
Well, it's kind of along the same lines as what I said about Nicolas Deslauriers. I think he brings value to a roster. I think he's a decent hockey player, but I just don't think it was a fit in Philadelphia. As you said, they traded him at the deadline last year to the Rangers and then brought him back in the offseason. I just don't think that they should have that kind of comfort level after what the defense was like last year. Do you really need to revert back to what you were last year by chasing a free agent? I don't think so. Justin Braun, he brings some value to a team. He played for the Rangers, the team that went to the conference final. He's a sturdy veteran on the back end, and he can play a role as a stay-at-home. But I just don't think that the Flyers should have prioritized that in free agency when you had a lot of other needs on the roster. And you do have some young defensemen coming through the system who he might end up blocking if he's in the lineup for the majority of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to another guy that was also given an extension at the end of last season to keep around on that core that you said was not that great. And that's Rasmus Ristolainen. And he signed a 5-year extension with a $5.1 million annual average value price tag. So what does Ristolainen need to do to live up to that $5 million a year?
Well, Ristolainen is one of the most polarizing figures in Philadelphia Flyers lore. Look no further than online debates. It's like if you mention this guy's name, you got 10 people coming at you. If you say he's good, one side gets mad. If you say he's bad, the other side gets mad. But Risto was given a pretty big extension, 5.1 in AAV over 5 years. And he's never really played to the caliber to earn that kind of money. He does have a good physical skill set. He's put up points in the past, but last year when he got less power play time, he didn't put up the offensive numbers. I would say that he needs to exceed what he did last year in order to live up to that 5.1 AAV. When they signed DeAngelo, they kind of assumed that they would plug him in on the right side of the top pair. Well, that didn't really give proper consideration to the fact that they just paid a right-handed defenseman 5.1 in AAV. And what, they don't consider him good enough to go on the top pair? I don't know where their priorities laid there. I like what Risto does physically. He plays with intensity. The Flyers struggle to clear their own porch in front of Carter Hart, and he's certainly a guy who has the intention to do that, if nothing else. But I just think that his contributions have been a little bit overvalued by this organization.
Yeah, he was really good in Buffalo. He's he was supposed to be their best guy to lead them, but obviously got traded away. So we'll see what happens. I mean, like I say, he has a good physical skill set, and he brings things. But I don't know, for $5 million, probably not. I don't really want him at that price. But well, we talked about the forwards. They're more towards the bottom. What do you think about the defense in the Metropolitan Division here?
I think they'll be better than last season. So that's an upward trajectory. But I still wouldn't say that they're on par with the teams that made the postseason last year. I wrote last January about Ivan Provorov and how he had struggled to move into that number one role like we talked about. And part of that was looking around the Metropolitan Division and seeing what the competition offers. You got John Carlson in Washington. He was the number one for a Stanley Cup winner. You got Chris Letang, who's been a number one for a very long time. Adam Fox, who's already won a Norris Trophy in his career. And Jacob Slavin, who I was already praising. Those were the 4 playoff teams last year. I don't think the Flyers are on that same level. It's pretty similar to what I said with the forwards. They did patch a little bit of the hole in the offseason by getting DeAngelo. I do expect him to play on the top pair. I don't think that Ryan Ellis will factor in much this season, but for conversation's sake, we'll give DeAngelo the right side top pair spot. and I'll say they pale in comparison to the best teams in the Metro there as well.
Yeah, that's very fair. They're okay, but they're not great this year. All right, well, let's talk about goaltending. You mentioned his name a little bit earlier. Carter Hart will once again be the man in Philadelphia. So what are your expectations as he enters his fourth season in the NHL? And will he be able to return to that flash of brilliance that he showed throughout the 2020 bubble playoffs?
I think he can over time. One thing that people forget about Carter Hart, and this kind of ties into the conversation about age we had a few minutes ago. He came up so young that he's still younger than the age that most goaltenders make their NHL debut.
Yeah, it's true.
So even with this much experience, he's not that old. He really has to get his legs under him a little bit more. You could even make the argument. Like you said, he's been kind of down since that 2020 playoffs. He had a terrible year in the 56 game COVID shortened season. He got in a bad way and his issues really snowballed. Last year, I would say he bounced back to an acceptable sense. His numbers weren't excellent, but he was playing in front of a team who was a mess in terms of defensive structure. And I thought he had some good games under his belt. If you look past the statistics there, I feel pretty comfortable about what he did last year. And I'd say he'd probably be on par in this season coming up in 22-23. That being said, a lot of the defensive structure issues may or may not still be there. So that might skew his statistics again. So it's going to be a little bit hard to judge just by statistical measures. But I think Hart still is the future in Philadelphia. I think he has a lot of potential. People wanted to compare him to Carey Price all the time when he first came into the league. I don't know if he'll be Carey Price the next one, but I am as confident about Carter Hart as I am about anybody in the Flyers organization.
Yeah, I think Hart still has a lot more. The thing is like you said, he's really young still. He was brought in the same thing as what I thought Carey Price was when he was brought in so early. I thought he struggled, and Hart's having a similar thing. He doesn't have a good defense in front of him either to help him out, so that's even tougher. So it's going to be. I think he still has that potential to be, that top tier starting goaltender. It's just they got to give him some more help in front of him. And we'll see if that happens this season, or maybe not this season, but next few. Even if Tortorella may bring in that good defensive system too, which may help out. All right, well, let's talk about his backup, which changed because of problems in Russia and Ukraine and all that stuff. But Felix Sandstrom looks like he's going to be the backup. How much confidence do you have in him behind Hart?
Sandstrom's a little bit of an unknown. He only has 5 games of NHL experience. I thought he was okay. He was a little shaky in the one game against the New York Rangers late last season, but showed a little bit of potential in those 5 starts. I just don't think it's wise to let him carry such a load because Carter Hart's career high in starts was last year, and it was only 44. So you're looking at a backup who's probably going to have to play a lot, and you're going to hand it over to Sandstrom, who's only got 5 games of NHL experience, regardless of how good or bad he was in those 5 games. They also signed Troy Grosnick. He's more of a veteran journeyman than a guy you're really going to count on to play more than a couple of games. And then they also have prospect Samuel Urson. He's a little bit of a wild card. I think if Sandstrom does end up struggling, or maybe if Hart gets injured, Urson could come up. He showed some flashes in the Flyers rookie games. Goaltending is a weird position, and sometimes these guys come out of nowhere. If you want to throw this prospect goaltender, the young Swede, in there, I would like to see it to take a risk that has some high potential.
Yeah.
I don't hate Sandstrom. I'm just a little bit nervous about the lack of security that he brings behind Carter Hart, who has not been that durable in his NHL career.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned Hart's best years, 44 starts. Sandstrom has 5 starts. You have other prospects in the wings. So, we could be talking about Flyers goaltending in the future being excellent. But let's focus on this season, Colin. Where does this goaltending match up with the other teams throughout the Metro? And are they going to have enough to get through the season?
Well, I think they finally have the upper hand on one. I think Carter Hart is a better starter than the Devils have. The Devils were ravaged by goaltending issues last year. They got Vanacek, who's a decent goaltender, but I would pick Carter Hart there. In terms of the top of the division, I still think you have to look at Igor Shesterkin. It's really him and then everybody else.
Yeah.
But I think goaltending is the one thing that the Flyers kind of finished in the average realm last year, to where every other position they were far below average. Mm-hmm. And I probably feel most confident about goaltending, especially the starter, not necessarily the backups, as we just discussed.
That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, if the guy we're going to talk about next, if he can put together a defensive system that can help the goaltending out, and that'll be much better. Well, I alluded to him. Let's talk about him. John Tortorella took over the head coaching job in Philly, and coming off from a season he wasn't coaching, he was in the analyst booth or whatever on ESPN. It was ESPN, right? Or TNT?
ESPN.
It's one of those. ESPN.
Sure. Now he's stepping back behind the bench. So what do you think about him being in Philadelphia, and what changes do you think he'll bring to this team?
I thought it was a good hire. While they were still conducting the coaching search, I had said that Jim Montgomery, Barry Trotz, and John Tortorella were the only 3 people that I would really accept, and they ended up getting one of them. So I have to be happy there. There are some questions about his past. He's an old school guy. He's, by his own admission, stepped over the line a little bit at certain times. But I think on the whole, he's an excellent hockey coach who can maximize the talent at his disposal. If you read into some of the quotes from Tortorella himself and from some of the people in the organization, I think what they're really trying to do here is start a new standard and a new era because of the embarrassment of the last 2 seasons. The Flyers, they fell out of the playoff race in January of last year. And I think part of the reason that nobody realized the magnitude of how bad they were down the stretch is because people stopped paying attention. I mean, you had Keith Yandel last year, who was in the lineup for his veteran presence, and he couldn't even execute a line change. He gave up a goal trying to get off the ice from the other side. I believe he was 35 at the time. You had a journeyman AHL player, Jerry Mayhew, standing on the bench while his team was on a power play, and he was on the bench for, 15, 20 seconds, watching his team play 4-on-4 before anybody realized it. And that's the reason why they hired a guy like Tortorella, basically to whip these guys into shape. And that's kind of been the narrative of the offseason, as in no more Mr. Nice Guy. Don't be too comfortable here. If you are too comfortable, you're going to see the door pretty quickly.
Yeah. Absolutely. And like you said, he's got Cam Atkinson there, who is a huge proponent of his style of coaching and has been a big supporter of his. So that's going to be helpful, having him in the locker room, kind of spreading that message before Tortorella even talks to that room. So, all right. Well, Colin, we're going to move over to our quick fire segment here. This is where Matt and I are going to throw some questions at you, and we'd like you to give us whatever answer comes first to mind. It can be a 1-word answer. You are allowed 1 to 2 sentences to explain the answer if you need to. All right. First one at you. What's the biggest storyline or question mark going into the 2022-23 season for the Philadelphia Flyers?
Say lack of offensive firepower.
All right.
Sean Couturier injury.
Yeah, that's a big one. All right, 1 or 2 breakout stars.
Can you say the question again, Matt?
Pick 1 or 2 breakout stars, so potential breakouts.
Breakout stars.
Yeah.
I'll go with Noah Cates. He showed some excellent flashes in the Flyers rookie games up at the Lehigh Valley Phantoms facilities last weekend. I think he's ready for the NHL. I think he'll be a very valuable asset to this team.
I like Noah Cates. All right. Who is one player that needs a bounce back from last season?
I think we talked about him a lot. It's Ivan Provorov.
Mm-hmm.
He might be candidate number 1 of shape up or ship out.
Yeah. For sure.
For sure.
All right, one player that could be an X factor this season.
X factor. I'll go with Tyson Forster. He also showed flashes in the Lehigh Valley Phantoms rookie games up there. I don't think he's going to start the season with the Flyers, but possibly a mid-season call-up.
Well, you might have just answered this next question with 2 of your previous questions, but what's one rookie or prospect that could surprise and make the roster out of training camp?
Well, I don't think Forrest will make it out of training camp, so I didn't want to go with him here. But I think Ronnie Attard is a good defenseman, a lot of physical tools. It's going to be tough with the roster battles, but I'll say Attard has an outside chance here.
All right.
Yeah, he played really well when he was signed and he was playing for a bit. So, that's a good choice. All right, what other players should fans be watching we have not mentioned on this show yet?
Well, I think it is going to be a little bit of a long season, so I'll go with a younger guy, Isaac Ratcliffe, another one I don't expect to make it out of camp, but possibly an injury call-up. Big physical guy. He's 6'6". Maybe he can throw the weight around.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I think Ratcliffe could be there a lot sooner than we realize. All right, Colin, who's going to lead the Flyers in scoring for forwards?
I think it'll be Travis Konechny. He showed some development at the end of last year, and I think he has the attitude to where he'll be able to accept Tortorella's criticism, work harder, and have a decent season.
Love it. Love it. And who will lead the team in scoring for defense?
I think it'll be Tony DeAngelo. As I said, I expect him to handle the power play minutes.
Yeah,
for sure.
Makes sense.
All right, one player that could be traded before the trade deadline.
I think James Van Riemsdyk. He's got a hefty cap hit, so nobody wants to take that on now, but in March it might be a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah, I could see JVR getting shipped out.
Yeah.
All right, Colin, this is a fun one. Give us one bold prediction or hot take for the 2022-23 season.
I think the Flyers lead the NHL in fighting majors. Something we haven't seen in a while. The Broad Street Bullies might be.
That's a fun prediction,
That's a good
actually.
One.
Yeah,
because they got Deslauriers, they got McEwen. That's the guys that
could be Roussel.
Roussel,
he'll throw
him. Yeah, 2 former Canucks there. Where will the Flyers finish in the standings? Will they make the playoffs?
I think it's just too hard to say they'll make the playoffs. And I'll say the same spot as last year, 4th from last.
All right. Doesn't sound good.
All right. Well, Colin,
it's fair.
Yeah, it is very fair. Well, Colin, thank you again for joining us and talking Philadelphia Flyers. Before we let you go, we're going to ask you to pick an article of the day. And we're doing things differently on these types of shows that we've been doing, where we're going to have you pick from the Philadelphia Flyers team writing, or the writing team, I guess should say. And it can be your own. So give us one article of the day from the Philadelphia Flyers.
Well, unfortunately, it has to be my own because I'm chasing people away from Flyers.
Not all of our viewers, though. They're all tuning in because of you, Colin.
Yes.
We're getting a rookie in. I'm very excited to have a partner. But for the article of the day, I'll just go with my recent one. It was evaluating 5 Flyers prospects after the rookie showcase. It was Noah Cates and Tyson Forster, Sam Urson, the goaltender, Igor Zamula, and well, that was only 4. There's 4 prospects from the rookie games, but those guys were all up in Lehigh Valley last weekend, and they beat the Rangers in the 2 rookie showcase games, recapped their performance, talked about how they might fit into the AHL plans or the NHL plans this season. So check that out on thehockeywriters.com.
Nice.
Yeah. I really like Noah Cates, and I think he's got a chance to do some big things, if not this year, and probably the next year or two. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for another edition of our NHL season preview. Thank you again to Colin for joining us to talk the Philadelphia Flyers. Please make sure you are following along with Colin and all of his writing at thehockeywriters.com. Make sure you're following him on all of his social medias. Make sure you follow the Hockey Writers on all of our social media platforms. Like and subscribe to our shows to keep up to date with all of our season preview shows that are rolling out until the season begins on October 12th. And also sign up for the Morning Skate, the daily morning newsletter sent to you for free Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You can sign up for that at morningskate.io. That's going to do it for another edition of the Hockey Writers Podcast.